Oh, I want to get back to what you had said because I think it was brilliant about the idea of talking to the rabbi and talking to the...
This happened 42 minutes and 49 seconds in. I am going to clip this. Jim Bennett said I said something brilliant. It's going in my journal.
Good, good. I'm happy to do that. I think one of the things that gets in our way of the kind of general spirituality you're talking about is a discounting of the spiritual experiences of people outside the church. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we have this kind of monopoly.
Wait. Repeat that. You think people are discounting?
Yeah, I think people think that we are the true church, and so people outside the church aren't really having spiritual experiences.
Yeah, but there's been plenty of prophets that have said we don't have a monopoly upon truth.
No, and in fact, whenever anybody stands up in testimony meeting and says, I know the church is true, I bristle a little bit because they're misquoting the Lord. At no point in the scriptures does the Lord say this is the only true church. At one point in Doctrine and Covenants, section 1, verse 30, he says, the only true and living church. And that and living, I think, is just as important as the true. Because the living power of God...
Ooh, because this is an interesting, controversial point without being polemic.
Well, that you can find truth just about anywhere. You can find truth. There are all kinds of churches that are true. There are all kinds of movies and secular education lessons that are true.
Doesn't that feed into, though, this kind of ecumenical idea that, we're one of many true churches? Like, literally, that's an argument anti-Mormon.
The qualifier of being living, we have the living power. And I think we have the priesthood, we have the authority, but there's also living creatures learn and grow from their mistakes. I mean, there's an understanding of fallibility there, that we are living, but we are beginning and we are living and we are growing. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a dynamic there that I think we miss. And I think the kind of general spirituality that can inform our study of the Book of Mormon, that can inform our experience in the church, requires a connection to that living power of God. Mm-hmm. It's not just enough to sit in a meeting and hear the stupid Thomas Marsh bucket of cream story 130 times because we heard all these true things and they don't mean anything to us anymore. They're dry, they're desiccated, there's no life to them.
Mm-hmm. And we're not all frickin' from Pioneer stock.
Right.
That needs to go out on Pioneer Day.
That's
and,
okay.
That's true.
So,
that's true.
One thing I want to say in this vein, I have never been bothered by the fact that I have felt the Spirit in other churches.
Right.
That, to me, is a signal, guys, these other churches exist because they have truth.
Right.
Yeah,
There is truth that's there. That's why they're going. And to me, we are just bringing about the restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints literally to bring all truth into one, right? And so like you were saying, bring in all of the truths from every other religion, and awesome. Like, we are going to be doing what our Father in heaven would have us do.
If we follow our own doctrine, we believe everything on this world is fallen. Mm-hmm. The church organization itself has to be flawed in some way or another. It can be the most perfect book. It can be the most perfect institution. But inherently, by being earthly, it is part of this flawed, fallen state that we call the mortal existence. Therefore, we need to accept that there is going to be, as you say, some living housekeeping that gets performed as we go along in building Zion.
And the Spirit teaches you of those truths, right? Every time that you hear them. So
wherever you hear them.
Exactly, because I've felt the Spirit from music. I felt it from a Justin Bieber song the other day, and I'm like, well...
Dude, there ain't... No, okay, that's where I draw the line.
I know.
No, I just
You
can't.
would think that. But, literally, I mean, as I was watching through your...
Well, there's the magic that Quaco was asking for. I mean, Brad's talking about having spiritual experiences while listening to Justin Bieber music. You know what I'm saying? Like,
legitimately, though. Like, Chance the Rapper's portion in Holy crap!
Now,
like,
you want to talk
so
Chance the
good.
Rapper? That's straight up doctrine, dog.
and so, like, when I was listening to what you were talking about with John DeLynn, where he mentioned like feeling the Spirit while watching Muppets,
right?
I'm like, when they're teaching you about service, of course. Like, the Spirit testifies of truth no matter where you're seeing it. Or
and don't knock it and trivialize it. Learn from it.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the probably the most depressing part of the CES letter when I was replying to it, is a section where he talks about the Spirit, and he talks about feeling the Spirit watching The Lion King.
Yeah. And
he says, does that mean that Mufasa is a historical figure? And and as I read that, I went, the church has let you down somehow. If you were able to go 30 years of your life and ask the question, well, if I feel good in The Lion King, does that mean that this cartoon is a historical figure? We have done a terrible job of equipping you to understand what the Spirit is and what the Spirit does.
Okay, now, I very much agree with you. I agree with you, and I want to push back on one thing. I will be first to say that the culture of the church in the wealth of the post-war era is the pride cycle in real time. That hard people, tough times created tough people, and tough people created the good times post-war, and the good times created soft people who didn't want to deal with the hard spiritual questions. It didn't really have to because everything was going honky-dory. You know what I'm saying? And that those soft people are now creating a new generation of hard times that millennials and Zoomers are suffering the effects of. Okay? So there won't be a bigger critic out there than me within the church, shall we say, that the church has epically failed in its service of many of its younger members, especially in answering deep spiritual questions. But at the same time, as a seminary teacher, I've had kids who I have proudly been to their honorable discharge services of their missions that have just overcome such great spiritual and physical boundaries where I just think, wow, like God is real, the church is real, the Spirit is real, this is amazing. But then there's also been kids where I'm like, it doesn't really surprise me that you drifted away from the church and went inactive. Because, dude, even when I knew you got a full night's rest, you came in and faked that you were asleep. Like you utterly avoided almost every single outreach I had. And you and I, we had good relationships. We were buddy. We were cool. I talked to them. I did all the best I could with them and stuff like that. But they were just not interested, not having it. And the first excuse they had, they took it. And it's like, at what point do you say, I do believe the church failed in its administration of truth to younger generations. So I am open to many of these criticisms, be it from the ex-Mormon community or just, third-party observers. But I do want to know more, and there has to be some kind of personal responsibility in this. Because the Book of Mormon, everybody had it, you could read it. Google, everybody had it, you could use it. At what point?
And as I was reading that part of the CES letter in particular, it just struck me as bitterness. Like, you have to be, I think, just kind of trying to make as bitter of an argument as possible. I don't think he really thinks that feeling the Spirit while watching The Lion King means Mufasa is a historical figure.
Also, The Lion King
twisting
sucks.
that.
That may be kind of controversial, but I've always hated The Lion
Hamlet
King.
in celluloid. Well, and then also, if you're smart enough to put together a 100-page PDF that has become the magnum opus of anti-Mormonism. Sorry, John, it's not your YouTube channel. Like, the magnum opus of anti-Mormonism is the CES letter. And if you're smart enough to put together that amazing piece of media, like, I will never knock the CES letter in terms of, like, this is when you're as a missionary and you want to be most effective, you know what I'm saying? This is an effective piece of media of getting it across its point and developing the following and the calls to action that it gives people, right? So if you're smart enough to put that together, you're smart enough to realize that the claim is not that Mufasa was a historical figure. Like, if you're smart enough to do what you did over here, Jeremy, I know for a fact that you're smart enough to put these two and two together. And I will never knock somebody that says, you know what, Mormonism just wasn't for me. Too much work. The only credible argument I think that anti-Mormons have had against the church is this whole new thing that they're coming out with, that it's a high demand religion. Anyway, anything that requires more than a Zoom hour of church or a rock concert to them is high demand. But, I do believe it could be called of us a high demand faith. You know what I'm saying? But it's just like, that's the only credence I've given. I'm like, I know you're smart to say that. I will never knock somebody that says it was too much for me. Too much demand. I want to be able to sleep in on Sunday, go golfing, and drink a beer. So I just decided to go inactive. I'm cool with it. I'm good with it. I have cousins that are kind of inactive in that way, but they don't try and blame their I just wasn't into it anymore onto a flaw, because they feel that, like, if they can find a flaw, they're justified. It's like, you need to be able to live with yourself well enough to have confidence in your own decisions. And if that requires you take personal responsibility and just say, it wasn't for me anymore, now I will bless your efforts.
Well, the family and friends that I have that have had that experience where they just kind of leave and say, it just wasn't for me and I want to sleep in and drink a beer. For the most part, these are people that were not really engaged with the church in the first place. I mean, they were dragged to church by their parents, and they went to church, and then the first opportunity when they had not to go to church, they stopped going to church. And so, I mean, people who experience the serious faith crises are people who were actively engaged and then find something that completely shatters their preconceptions of what the church should be. And I think that that's a genuine experience. I would not say that doesn't happen. I would not say that Jeremy Runnels particularly wanted to get drunk and wanted to sleep in on Sunday.
Yeah, I say that in the proverbial we kind of way.
Right. But you know, but in looking at that, and maybe this is a little bit of a tangent, but I don't necessarily think it is. One of the things that Bill Reel kept pushing me on more than almost anything else is this idea of, what do you say when there's a Catholic person who's telling me they've had a spiritual experience that tells them that their church is true? And what do you say about the Muslim that says that they've read the Quran and they know it's from God? And, you know, my answer is wonderful. I say,
they're right.
Congratulations and wonderful. And I am so grateful that you have found God and you have a divine connection that can carry you through mortality. It is not, and I think there's this sort of sense in the church that in order for us to be the true church, we have to first prove that every other church is false before we can have legitimacy in our truth.
Okay, so that's an attack that I hear from the anti-Mormon community that I have never experienced myself. And I don't know if it's because I grew up in the mission field where you could go inactive whenever you wanted.
Right.
And there wasn't maybe enough members for you to be that person that just went along passively. I mean, where I grew up, you could disappear into anti-Mormonism and there was just not enough hands to come and find you.
Right.
So you only came to church if you were actually honestly invested. And so I'm willing to accept that maybe in other places where Mormons are more prominent and they're not the salt that, you know, flavors the
earth,
the dish, okay, but they're the frickin' dish itself, okay, right. That there might be worse dynamics that go along. But I push back on that simply because I never experienced, growing up, we would have youth events with the Jewish synagogue. We would be actively exposed to other faiths and would eat the Seder on the Passover with a freaking rabbi.
Right.
Like I was having the antithesis of what you're describing. So when people say that, oh, Mormons, they're out there trying to tell you the Jews are mistaken and freaking, you know, the Calvinists burned people and that, you know, the
what's a Calvinist bird person?
Calvinist burning people.
Oh, burning.
Just John Calvin.
Okay.
Burning his.
You know, it was pretty gruesome torture with people that didn't get along with it religiously.
I thought you said bird people. I thought that was kind of fun.
So it's like, I know that's just something I personally have never experienced, and I'm willing to accept that somebody else's lived experience may have been different.
Well, you and I grew up in pretty similar circumstances. I grew up in Calabasas out here in California.
Oh, geez, that's Kanye West territory.
That's Kanye West territory. He tried to change.
Made it cool.
He tried to change the mascot of Calabasas High School from the Coyotes to the Wolves, and we Calabasas alumni rose up and opposed Kanye West.
Okay, that's it, Kanye. You are free to rebut on my show any of these claims.
There you go. There you go. But we had a rabbi come to our seminary class to explain Hanukkah to us. Our seminary teacher was a man named Glenn Gordon, who was actually going to the University of Judaism out here, and he brought this rabbi in who says, Hanukkah is just this minor holiday celebrating a military victory that's been blown all out of proportion because of Christmas. And it was fascinating and wonderful. I mean, so I had that experience. I grew up in a predominantly Jewish community where we actually, our school district, I was in the Las Virgenes school district, and we got all of
you got all the days of Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, we got Rosh Hashanah. We always went to Disneyland on Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
Because no one was there. It was nice. It's in January. It was perfect. It was delightful.
So you and I have had both a lived experience where we're actually encouraged to cultivate the best of other faiths.
Well,
here you are in the same breath saying that we got a culture of trying to put everybody down.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Because at least in my lived experience, the idea was, these guys, but they're kind of misguided. They're kind of, I don't know. I don't know how to frame this or why it's essential to what I'm trying to say. Because what I'm trying to say is,
Well, you're trying to personify an attitude, I think.
well, I'm trying to say that other faiths, that other people who have spiritual connections to God have a great deal to teach us. That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay.
And,
I agree.
And there's a great deal of value in that, and I think that's kind of what you were saying. But I think that the approach that we've taken to the Book of Mormon, I think we need more of Kwaku's approach of a mystical encounter with God through the Book of Mormon.
Okay, he might be your son-in-law pretty soon. So,
I
you know.
I just don't see that happening. But
No, but you're right that you want a return to what I consider is the golden nugget of faith. And whether it's us trying to do it internally with replacing follow the prophet with, follow the spirit with follow the prophet, or others trying to do it externally by constantly trying to secularize or declare invalid without a study proving it, many different truth claims that are inherently spiritual in nature and have nothing to do with archaeology or have to do with anything else. We have diluted the best aspects of our own faith internally and externally been allowed to be influenced by others who do not have our best interests at heart. And I believe the antidote for that, like you say, is what I said in my words, general spirituality. You say is the Book of Mormon. So, and Kwaku calls the magic, shall we say, of that original magical worldview of the early church. If there was anybody listening to this that just felt in their hearts, okay, I do want this rebirth, what would you say they should go home and do today? Last comment. What would they go home and do before the parking lot sucks into its black hole all of that good feeling? What would you say they do?
boy, that is a great question, and I want to come up with a great answer. So I'm trying to choose my words carefully. All right, I'm going to tell another story. Can I tell another story?
Yeah, you're like that guy in the office that answers a question with a question. All right.
No, it's not a question with a question. Because I mean, I don't think there's a 1, 2, 3, here's the formula, here's the box to hand it to you.
Hit it.
When I was, I think, about 10 years old, they did this big pageant at the Shrine Auditorium in right across from USC. I remember we went there, and it was called Third Nephi. And I played I got paid $5. It was my first professional gig as an actor.
Nice.
I played one of the Nephite children that Jesus Christ comes to visit. And that pageant included 2 different songs. I always remember this because we went to the Shrine Auditorium and my mother kept saying, "You can't even walk outside. This is the most dangerous place in the whole universe." Yeah. And then I went to the University of Southern California and I lived a block away from the Shrine Auditorium.
Yeah.
So,
hey, it was the 80s, dog.
It was the 80s. And so
it was like straight up RoboCop down there, dog.
Right. But so I'm in this pageant and there are 2 songs in the pageant. And one of them you probably know. The song, I Feel My Savior's Love.
Rock on.
I feel my Savior's love. Da, 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 da.
Keep going.
And that's the primary song. And the other one was called The Love of God, which hasn't appeared anywhere in a hymn book anywhere. The love of God leads me on. No? Quaker, no. You don't want to sing this in the next verse?
I don't know it.
All right. There you go. So that's what
I know Baby Got Back, but that's
Baby Got Back. And we were in this, and the actor who played Christ was so compelling, and it was just such this wonderful experience. And I can remember we had a testimony meeting in between shows. We had a matinee, and then we had a thing in the evening. And the director of the show stood up, and I remember having the spiritual experience, and he said to me, he said to everybody, but I felt like he was saying it to me. He says, I want you to remember how you feel right now, because that which you are feeling right now is the love of God. And I felt this overwhelming sense of, yes, this is the love of God. This is what the love of God feels like. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think about that moment until about 5 years ago, when the stake choir at a stake conference in my stake, somehow somebody had dug up this old song, The Love of God, and they started singing it, and all of a sudden, all of that same sense of wonder and majesty that I felt as a 10-year-old kid, and the love of God, I felt that what you are feeling right now is the love of God. And I have always associated that with 3rd Nephi. I've always associated that with the Book of Mormon. And I've had that same sort of feeling. I knew that God knew me by name, that God loved me. And I have that feeling when I engage with the Book of Mormon, not in an attempt to fulfill an assignment, but when I am searching for spiritual nourishment and I turn to the Book of Mormon for that living power in the church, and it is always there. It is always there. That doesn't mean I always have that feeling when I read the Book of Mormon. But when I engage with the Book of Mormon and I'm looking to be fed, there is always spiritual food there for me. So what would I have people do? Well, I'd have them go back to be 10 years old and then be in this pageant and have these marvelous experiences. No, I would have them recognize that the Book of Mormon can feed them spiritually when they are hungry. And I think the way that will happen will be different with each person, because each person is spiritually hungry in a different way at different times in their life.
Some might want bacon.
Some might want bacon. But that's actually a great story, because you were fed in a way, you were feasting upon the words of Christ in a way that would never have occurred to me. Just you and Jim Gaffigan can read the Book of Mormon, and bacon is your answer.
Yeah.
But the prescription, the idea that there is sort of just one answer, there's one thing you need to do. If you could just do this, then that's not what mortality is, and we've tried to sort of pasteurize the mortal experience through the church and say, if you do 1, 2, 3 and check off all these boxes, ta-da, that's where spirituality is. A spirituality comes when you reach out to God and find that he's there.
Okay, if you had to sum it into one word. I've got a word in my mind that I'll share with you, but you say first. Because that was a very long answer that I think works.
Okay.
But if you had to choose one word that the person could think about that's a verb, doesn't even have to be a verb. What would be that word that they take away that's going to help bridge that gap between their non-spirituality and that spirituality that you think is where they need to be?
One word. It's not bacon. I would say reach.
Ooh,
reach,
that's good.
Search. I mean, it's an active sort of
I was
come
thinking
from here
engage.
to going there. Engage.
If I were to try and sum up what you said, I had the feeling that you were trying to say engage with the Spirit.
Engage with the Spirit.
Attempt to engage with the Spirit.
And the Book of Mormon is the greatest catalyst for spiritual engagement that we have on planet Earth. I firmly believe that. And I firmly believe that the problems in the church can be solved not through some kind of academic. I don't think anybody's faith is rooted in the existence of Nahum or any kind of the apologetic arguments that we make for the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
I think that nobody's faith is rooted in that. It is rooted in a personal, intimate encounter with God as we engage with him through the Book of Mormon.
Okay, I agree with everything you said, except for people like me actually do well with the Nahum stuff.
Oh, I love the Nahum stuff.
Yeah.
But it's not the basis of your testimony.
No, but
right?
I got to tell you, it's a buttress that holds up the cathedral that you wonder if it would stand without that buttress because the cathedral's so big.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like there's...
Right.
There's for guys like me, and once again, we got to end this podcast. We'll talk about another topic soon, so we won't get into this. But my spirituality from a young age was very, very inquisitive and thoughtful and philosophical. Like I remember as early as 11 years old thinking like, okay, is there anybody not covered? Is there anybody not covered by the plan of salvation? And I remember going through my mind, okay, well, what if you're born deaf, dumb, mute? What if you're born this? What if you're born in a starved Rwandan city? What if, and I remember thinking how the way the plan of salvation as laid out by the Mormon church actually really does cover everybody. And that was the amazement to me that there actually was a system out there that did not have that flaws. And it was the machinations of this perfect machine, this perfect plan that a benevolent God has given us that really made me actually think, okay, this is worth dedicating time and energy into, and spurred my inquisitive nature. So things like, dude, there's no actual evidences of ancient Israelites in Egypt. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Can be very shaking. And
right.
I actually very much empathize with people that find difficulties of church history as difficulties in testimony. I only push back when they start acting like they've been lied to, or else they start grifting off it. But the actual nature of a faith crisis due to things like Nahum, or the anachronisms of lions in the Bible, or anachronisms of tapers in the Book of Mormon and stuff like that.
Right.
You know, I'm wildly sensitive to that argument, where I may be completely just a jerk and insensitive to other arguments. You know
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's absolutely true. And that's why I began talking about Nahum, and somebody wrote it, and the Book of Mormon's a miracle, and I think all of that is essential in order for us to be able to take the Book of Mormon seriously.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in terms of our direct encounter with God, Nahum isn't doing it.
Yeah. And I love what you said at the beginning of the podcast, though, that over time the Book of Mormon has become more credible, not less.
Right.
And I think that's huge, because people, I think, have a false expectation set for them of what we should have as evidence for the Book of Mormon, when it lays out for them in it, you can pray and ask God for a witness of this, right? And they're like, well, no, I want to see Zarahemla. Like, no, like, God wants you to walk by faith and not by sight. How would you grow if you saw Zarahemla versus how would you grow if you read the Book of Mormon, built your relationship with God, and asked him if it was real, right? And so, yeah, that's what I think it's for.
Cool. So we're going to leave it at that, and then we're going to jump onto the issues. I believe next is the Immaculate Conception.
Nice.
Nice. All right, awesome. This is Midnight Mormons. We'll see you guys in the next video.